And now, the show that bridges the gap between faith and business. Welcome to Bottom Line Faith.
On today's show, Paul Estridge, president of Estridge Homes.
I like to think that I demonstrate my faith through my contemplation and decisions and how I deal with everyday situations. And I think that's the most Christ-like model as I read the Bible. I think I can think of very few sermons that he gave. A few. Most of them were just everyday circumstances where he spoke into the situation, and that's what I try to do.
Bottom Line Faith is back on, and I'm Adam Ritz with your co-host, Ray Hilbert. Hey, Ray, how are you?
I'm terrific today, Adam. How about yourself?
I'm excited for the iTunes capabilities that Bottom Line Faith has now. Do you have a smartphone, or are you on the flip phone?
I'm on a smartphone, and I'm on the Google platform, which we're there in the Google Play Store as well, and we're just seeing incredible growth for the podcast. We're excited about that.
Excellent. So, just search us out online, Bottom Line Faith. The website is bottomlinefaith.org, and you can download and subscribe to the shows through iTunes or Google Play. Yeah. As Ray does. Ray, it's good to see you here for Bottom Line Faith, and I always enjoy the guests that you bring on the show to learn what they do and how their faith drives their success.
Well, Adam, it's really quite a lot of fun that we have around here, and this really is the show where we kind of the metaphor we like to use is we want to lift the lid and tinker around a little bit in the engine of Christian business leadership. And I'm particularly excited about our guest today because God has really, really brought this man through an incredible journey.
Okay. You've piqued my interest. I cannot wait for this one.
Well, folks, it is our pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Paul Estridge as our guest on this edition of Bottom Line Faith. Paul, hello and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Ray. I'm glad to be here. Adam, good seeing you.
Hey, Paul. Nice to meet you.
For those of you that don't know, Paul and I have probably known each other since the mid-'90s, and I wish I had time on our show today to tell you an amazing story of how that all came about. But I will just tell you this, that of all the Christian business leaders that I've met across the country, this man's in my top 5, top 10 at the least in watching how God has used him, and he's been a huge blessing to me and thousands of others across the country. So, Paul, how about we just get into the story? Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest here in Carmel, Indiana, and when Carmel was a small little town with one stoplight and 2 restaurants, and it's changed considerably since then. But my father started his own business as a home builder in our home when I was 10 years old. So I got to experience he and my mother both starting a company. And I went to high school there and then went to college at the University of Evansville. And probably the most impressionable aspect of my childhood, which a lot of children today don't get to experience, is working alongside my parents and learning the lessons of what it's like to start a company and a business. And I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so that came later in my life, but we'll probably talk about that.
Absolutely. And so tell us a little bit about the company today, and we'll weave our way back through the past, but tell us what you're up to today.
Well, we restarted Estridge Homes in 2013. Because of the past, and today we've built about 200 homes so far since we restarted.
Absolutely. So, Adam, I'd kind of like to walk with Paul down a little bit down memory lane here, if that'd be all right for our guests.
Yeah, I'd love to find out more about that. It really interested me how you said we restarted in 2013. Right. So now I really want to hear the story of where it was before 2013.
Walk us through that experience,
Sure. So it's easier for me to start at the beginning, So I built my first home when I was 20. My father let me help him while I was young, and then he said, it's time that you build your first home. And so I did that and learned a tremendous amount from that. And came out of college working for him for a few years. And he was young, younger than I am today relative to my children. So he had a lot of career left in him, and I was raring to go. So he knew I was going to probably do something else. But I had pursued learning about building whole neighborhoods. He was a custom builder, and I wanted to build entire neighborhoods. And so I started a company in 1983 when I was 25. And our first neighborhood was in Lawrence, Indiana, and it was a tremendous success. In the first 2 years, we built 144 homes. And at that time, I was not a believer, wasn't a Christian in any aspect, wasn't interested in anything like that. And but having made a lot of money, which I had planned on making, and being successful and well known and all those types of things started happening. And I had always placed my plans on those types of things bringing me happiness, and it didn't. In fact, when I realized that none of those things brought happiness, I basically had a nervous breakdown in my late 20s. And so one day, as a single man with everything going for me, I basically gave my life to Christ in my apartment one night, in tears, crying out. And I happened to have a Bible my mom had given me for reasons I really don't know, but I had it. And I opened it up to what was Psalms 25, and I read it over and over and over again through tears. And that was the night I gave my Lord to Christ, my life to Christ. So,
so you were 28.
I was 27, 28.
27, 28. And by all accounts, on top of the world. You've got a business that's thriving, 144 homes in your first 2 years, and probably making money hand over fist, and yet you found yourself alone in your apartment, broken down and open before the Lord, and He showed up, didn't He?
He did show up, and a lot of people have different experiences in those moments. I felt just a tremendous lift of weight and pressure off of me. And the next morning I woke up and made life-changing commitments. And the Lord brought me my wife within a year or so. And it's been an amazing journey ever since. Not always easy, but quite amazing and very fulfilling.
Well, I really thought what you might tell us is from that moment on, life was just sunshine and roses and never a challenge in business. And,
right.
But that's not what we're going to hear, is it?
No, you're not. Well, there were many years in which it was very good.
Yeah, right.
And, like everyone else, there's rough days and tough days and things like that. That's normal. But in the decade of the 2000s, that started off very, very good. And the first half was phenomenal. And in fact, our company made over $25 million in the first half of the 2000s. And then all of a sudden the tsunami hit in 2007, 2008. And what would lead ultimately to a period of about 5 years when I would go through some very difficult times. Was able to endure a abdominal aneurysm, personal bankruptcy, losing my company that had built at that time over 8,000 homes. In the Indianapolis area. I lost both my parents, and it was a very difficult time.
Sounds to me like you might have felt a little bit like Job during that season.
Well, actually, just before we went out of business, I asked all the leadership in my company to read the book of Job. And I think it's one of the most important stories in the Bible.
If I recall, somewhere in that time frame, at least what at least from the outside looking in might have looked like the pinnacle of success, your company was even featured on Extreme Home Makeover, right?
Right.
You led that initiative here.
That's right, and we were the finale for that season. 2-hour special on ABC, and that was probably the highlight of my past company's experience. It was truly an amazing event, building 2 homes in a period of 105 hours. And over 5,000 volunteers, and it was a tremendous outreach of giving that I've never experienced before. In the midst of our storm, we found it important that even though. And everyone knew we were going through a difficult time. And our situation was very public. It was in the paper. But we nevertheless felt it was important to live out our faith and to bring people together and build together. even in the toughest of times.
That's what I find interesting about this, Adam, is just from a public or worldly perspective all across the country. Here's a company being featured, an incredible outpouring of volunteerism, an incredible blessing that's occurring, and yet there's a storm happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, nobody knows what's happening behind the curtain.
That's exactly right. So Paul, we've got listeners here who are business owners and marketplace leaders and moms and dads and probably pastors, a wide variety of people that will listen to the program. So walk us through, help us understand, I don't know the right way the darkness, the challenge, the darkest moment, the hardest moment when everything started crashing. What was that like?
Well, it wasn't a sudden event. It took place over a course of 2 or 3 years, really.
Yeah.
And we were fighting it the entire time. And the darkest of times for me was the imagining of the people that were going to be hurt as a result of us going out of business. The small people. It's not small people, but small businesses and
your vendors and
the vendors
such,
and the suppliers who would ultimately take some form of a loss. Mm-hmm. And it still today haunts me. I think about it every day, and I still want to figure out some way before my life's over to pay that debt. Now, what's been one of the most amazing experiences is when I came back in business, I needed to go back to those same people who had been with me for 20, 30 years and say, would you help me lay flooring, or would you help me frame homes, or would you provide block and lumber to me? And they all said yes.
Every one of them.
Every single one of them. And that's been one of the greatest blessings that I've ever experienced. And I asked them why. I asked several of them why, who I knew pretty well. And they said, Paul, we watched you do everything we thought that a person could do to save your company and to prevent this from happening. And you personally took as big a loss as any of us did.
Yeah.
And you put all the money back in, and I did. And that was the tough business decision. Do I keep it and shut the doors, as many other companies did, or do I put it all back in the game? And I put all of it and some back in the game. My parents stepped in and they helped out with some money that they had and helped mortgage some land. And we were a family that was committed to doing whatever it took. We never felt that the money was ours. It was ours to use to, in some way, shape, or form, benefit our community, benefit other people's lives, and to be good stewards of it. I don't know today if I could say that I did that, but I tried.
Yeah.
And but there's a good news out of this, and that is that they can't eat you. They can't eat you.
They may try, though, right?
Right. And going broke isn't by any means one of the more difficult things to deal with. I can sit here and tell you that. The sun comes up the next day. It doesn't lobotomize you. You don't forget everything you learned and all your skills and abilities, and you just keep going with faith, and you don't give up. And one of the other things that I kept at the forefront of my mind is that throughout this entire experience, I was modeling what a man of faith does when faced with really, really difficult adversity for my children and people in the community.
And I really want to talk about that for a couple of moments, because I want to ask a question and then come back with a comment, which will lead to another question. But when you were in the midst of it, when you were right in the battle, did you question God? Did you maybe shake your fist at him and say, why is this happening? Or what was that like for you in your own spiritual journey in the midst of that valley?
I'm asked that question a lot, and I'm not so sure that people believe my answer, but for me, I never did.
Okay.
I just never did. And I think it comes from one of my values at the core of my being is a is I really try to practice a selfless way of living and thinking.
Okay.
And a selfless mindset within one's faith, I think, leads us to never believing that the worst of times and circumstances can happen to any of us.
That's right.
And I never felt that I was above or deserving to not be someone that was subject to the same things that other people had endured. In fact, in our company meetings for the last couple of years, I would say to people, not every company, everything will crumble in this world. Everything will, and every company will eventually go out of business, and we're all going to pass away. And for those of us that believe, we will have a long life after this one.
Yeah, that is really good. And I I want to come back because you and I have talked before. Mm-hmm. You were counseled to do something, but you did the opposite. And I'm referring specifically to public awareness. Would you tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, so, when it was inevitable, several high net worth businessmen who I knew said, "Well, listen, you got to hire some public relations people, and you got to figure out how to get this on the back page because this will kill you. This will absolutely crush you, and you just can't afford to have this story out there on the front page." And I thought about that for not really very long, maybe a day or two, and I was kind of going that way. And then all of a sudden, something spoke to me. Maybe it was in prayer or just driving down the road. But, my favorite verse is Romans 12:2, which is conform no longer to the patterns of this world, but forever renew your mind, in part. And so I'm kind of a nonconformist in that regard, particularly when it comes to my growing faith. So that was worldly advice I was getting, but it wasn't spiritual advice. So I hired the public relations firm, and I said, okay, this is the game plan. We want to be on the front page. And
not the back page, but the front
page. The front page.
Sports section or A1? A1.
No, the front page,
yes.
A1, front page of the Indianapolis Star. They didn't quite understand it. They said, that's really not what we do. And I said, yeah, but it probably is an easy assignment given our name in the marketplace. And they said, yeah, it will be. So they set up the meetings, and I met with them, and I was as transparent and as authentic and as out there as I could possibly be. And it's probably the best decision I've ever made, because people have come up to me through the years since then and said, I just appreciate so much, because I've gone through difficult times, or I had something similar to you, and to see how comfortable you were with living it out so openly made me feel comfortable in the events and circumstances that they had faced. So, look, these things, this is life. This is just the way it works.
That's right.
And so why hide from it? I'm not above it or immune from it.
Well, folks, we're talking with Paul Estridge of Estridge Homes, and really walking through his journey and his story. And Adam, as I'm listening there, I think that so often when we're in the midst of failure, we're tempted to try to hide it and be shamed in that. And yet we're hearing a totally different story today.
Yeah, that's inspiring, and you've inspired me maybe to start my own PR firm where we do that. We don't take your laundry and put it on the back page. We'll make it bigger and worse than it actually is.
Yeah, so why not? Why not? Your comeback's a better story.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be great if they did this in politics too, right? So just imagine every candidate. Let's just go ahead and get all the junk out on the front page and say, okay, I'm guilty of all that and a whole lot more. Now can we get on with the business of solving problems? And so Paul, you got through the dark stages and that sort of thing. You rebirthed the company. So now, what's life like? How are you specifically living to work, working out your faith in your company now? What's that look like?
Well, I don't think it's any different than it's ever been.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a preacher businessman. I like to think that I demonstrate my faith through my contemplation and my actions and decisions and how I deal with everyday situations.
Yeah.
And I know that it's observed that way.
Yeah.
I've been told so by many people. And I think that's the most Christ-like model as I read the Bible. You know, I think I can think of very few real sermons that he gave. A few,
Yeah.
but most of them were just everyday circumstances where he spoke into the situation, and that's what I try to do.
Well, and you know, Adam, I know you know this as well, but the reputation that Paul has in this community through this whole story is amazing, and I know God's using him to share this story all across the country as well. It's really powerful.
When I saw that we were going to have Paul Estridge on the show, and I know the brand Estridge Homes, you know, I'm pretty well informed. I know what's going on around town, and I hadn't really thought about any of those dark days, or that your company had closed down and then there was a rebirth in 2013. Right. I mean, I just and I would think a lot of people that know you personally too just know not only that you're a man of faith, but you're Estridge Homes, that brand, that power behind that brand. It's almost like to a lot of people it never went away. Well,
that's good. I'm glad. I hope that's the case. And we were just out of business a short time, and I'm glad to know that that's out there. You know, we being asked to build a person's home is one of the greatest honors, and by building whole neighborhoods, we are connecting other people's lives and their souls together. And it's I just on the way over here, I drove by one of our neighborhoods and snuck through it just to see how it was maturing, and it's very, very fulfilling.
If you see some trash on one of the lawns, do you stop and get out?
Well, I don't do that. I think people should own their own trash.
Maybe you have some hedge trimmers in your trunk, and you see a hedge that's out of place.
I will tell you a funny quick story about that neighborhood. Is years ago I was driving through that neighborhood and I saw a crack, literally, in the corner of one of the homes. And I went up to the front door and introduced myself. This was a couple years after we had built the home. And the customer was, and I said, do you know about the crack? And this is a structural issue. We need to come back and take care of this. And he was shocked, and it's Covington Estates right down the street here, and we took care of it. And that to me is.
That's like Steve Jobs. You've got a crack on your iPhone. Let me stop by. And
Yeah, maybe he did that. I don't know.
That is great. Believe it or not, we are heading into the home stretch of our time here with Paul Estridge today. So, Paul, just a couple other questions I'd love to dive into. And you know, we've heard your story and how you've maintained your Christian walk and integrity through dark times, and now coming back through success as you're rebuilding the company. But just one of the questions I'm just dying to ask is, what's the best advice that anyone has ever given you? What was it, and how's that continue to impact you today?
Well, I think that the best advice I'd ever been given was that relationships that we build and our reputations in this world are the two most valuable assets that we can ever realize. And that in combination with, at the end of the day, it's always about people.
Yeah.
It's always about people. And so the fact that we've been able to come back so quickly, I attribute to the fact that the relationships that we had built were genuine and real and authentic, and the reputation, was in part due to stopping and knocking on a customer's door 2 years later and telling them, hey, you have an issue here, we need to take care of it. And that's caring first and foremost about people.
Yeah.
And that is, if I have a ministry, that's it. It's just about pouring into other people's lives.
And to that point, we were a customer before. We built a home with you, and I remember going out on the job site and talking to some of your subcontractors, your flooring people, your drywallers, carpenters, and to a person, every one of them said that that's one of the reasons they loved working with you and for you is they know Mr. Estridge cares. And when you've got that at that level, then you know you're doing some things right in a way that's honoring the Lord. So that is really, really fantastic. I wish we had 2 more shows with Paul, don't you?
Well, we can always bring him back.
We can always bring him back.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of a
Sure,
podcast.
sure.
So, Paul, I would be remiss. There's a favorite question we have here at Bottom Line Faith, and I hope this doesn't throw you off your seat here, but I like to set the stage. And Proverbs 4:20, this is what I call my above all else question. In Proverbs 4:23, we see these words. It says, above all else, guard your heart, for it determines the course of your life. So, Paul, let's hit the fast forward button, and it's toward the end of your time this side of eternity. You've got a chance to gather your loved ones, your family, your friends, your business associates, and it's time for Paul Estridge to pass on his above all else advice. What would that be and why? Above all else.
Wow, that's a powerful question. I can picture being there. I really believe that I would say, above all else, love one another. And I know that that's the words of Jesus. But I really believe that that is the most powerful message I could leave for my children and friends and family and those that I would know, is to love each other. And you can go through tough market times and business times, but it's those relationships and the love that you have, which is serves our purposes.
Yeah, that's strong. That's strong.
I love you, Paul.
Thank you. I love you, buddy.
That's awesome.
That is good stuff. And so, Paul, we're just so grateful that you would take the time to join us here on Bottom Line Faith. And so I'd like to just kind of close our time together this way if we could. There's probably a business owner or business leader right now who's discouraged, who's frustrated. Maybe they feel like they're in the pit of failure and they don't feel any hope. They don't see any way out. What would you say to them as we close the show today?
Well, they need to surrender their life. They need to surrender their life to our Lord and Savior. And they need to get on their knees and say, Lord, I can no longer cope and manage the circumstances that I'm faced with by myself. And I ask for you to step in and take the steering wheel and steer me during these times, because I don't have that capacity. And with complete and total faith that he will do that. And when they surrender themselves, that's when selflessness leaves their body and dependency on our Lord takes over.
That's not theory for you. That's been real life, right?
That's real life.
Adam, closing thoughts from you, and then I'll offer one as we wrap up today.
I liked when Paul said early on, when you were talking about success, you said that the money and the money that you make and have with your family, you've never felt like it was yours. You felt like it was something that you had to use and to steward in the right way. That really touched me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my takeaway that I would just leave today would be that in spite of dark times, in spite of what the world would call failure, it's part of God's plan. He's trying to shape our character, and it really is our opportunity to have our faith tested and to see if we'll remain true to God's call in our life.
I think that's absolutely point on. I think it's exactly the way it is. He's shaping our lives and our love for each other through these circumstances.
Paul, can we follow you on Twitter or Facebook or anything?
Facebook. I'm on Facebook mostly. And I love to see new friends and correspond that way.
And the Estridge Homes website is?
It's Estridge Homes.
EstridgeHomes.com.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, and Estridge.com is our website.
Estridge.com. Okay.
Well, folks, this is Ray Hilbert and Adam Ritz with the Bottom Line Faith Podcast. Our guest today has been Paul Estridge of Estridge Homes, and we are so grateful that you would join us today. Paul, thanks for your time. And as always, you're such a blessing and an encouragement. I know God's going to use this conversation to bless leaders all over the country. Thank you.
Thank you.